Hello and welcome to the MS for Mama podcast. I'm your host, Abbie Halberstadt, happy wife, mama to 10, Bible-believing Christian. And on today's podcast, I have a wonderful guest for you today who is going to be such a source of encouragement and wisdom. And I can't wait to introduce you to her. But before we get going, I want to highlight our podcast sponsor and one of my favorite ministries, Summit Ministries, which is a Christian apologetics camp for 2 weeks each summer. Kids, or young adults, I should say, ages 16 through 22 can come and receive an education that will help them create an unshakable faith that helps them to trust in that biblical foundation you've laid. And that's why I'm sending my teens, Simon and Ezra, back this year. They're going to Georgia this year, but you can also go to Colorado. You can sign up for that 2-week camp at summitministries.org/MAMA, mama. You can use the code MAMA, MAMA2424 at summitministries.org/mama. And that code will get you $200 off. You can also apply for financial aid if you need it. All right, friends, we have a really fun treat today. My good friend Durenda is here, and she is going to talk to us about her new book, Raising Boys to Men. We're going to chat all things motherhood. Oh, I just saw a child go by behind me. That's okay. For those of you watching the video, that's real life right there. And if you're just listening, just know my children are scurrying around in the background behind us. Durenda, you understand all about that.
Absolutely.
Although you don't have too many scurriers left in the house. Can you tell us about yourself and your family?
Yes. So I actually do have scurriers quite often because we have a lot of grandchildren and grown kids who live around us. So we're on acreage. So I had two. I had my 19-month-old and 1-month-old babies this morning, and I was watching for a couple hours. So yes, we do have scurriers at our house, just not quite as frequently as you do. But I'm married to Daryl, and we have been married for 34 years. We have 8 kids, 5 boys and 3 girls, ages 19 to almost 33.
Amazing.
And then we have our 11th grandbaby on the way. We don't know if that one's a boy or a girl, but out of all the rest of them, there have been 7 boys. So we're very boy heavy. And we've been homeschooling for 30 years, and I've written some books, have a podcast. And so that's pretty much kind of everything in a nutshell.
Everything in a nutshell. I bet it's not everything, but it's the nutshell part of it.
Yes.
Yeah. That's awesome. I love that you are investing in the next generation. I think that is something that has been modeled for me by my own mom. And I'm just so grateful that she has shown me what it looks like to invest well in leaving a legacy for those coming after. And we call her Softa. What's your grandma name?
Nana.
Love it.
So it's Nana.
We call my mom Softa.
Nanny. Yeah.
What's that?
Sometimes it's Nana, it's Nanny. And then I have a 9-year-old. Our oldest grandson is 9 years old, and he's kind of cool now. So now he's shortened our names. So I'm Nans.
Nice. That's cute. That's actually quite hip.
Yeah. And he calls him Bops. So it's Bops and Nans.
Pops and Nans. I love it.
We just let them call us whatever they want to call us.
Yeah. Well, we're going to get to talking about your book in just a little while, but you are just like my mom. I think you're younger than she is, but just like my mom, a pioneer in the homeschooling movement. And so I would love to hear kind of your history of what inspired you to do that, kind of why you chose something that was way more countercultural than it even is now.
Yeah. So we had our first baby in 1991. And so that's, the decade that we started homeschooling. I actually decided that I wanted to homeschool my kids before I even had kids. And so this was back in the 80s. I met a homeschooling family, and I was just really so interested in what this was all about. And I loved the family. I loved the fruit that I saw in their family. And I also looked at my experience, which was mostly public school and not a bad experience. But there was something inside of me that wanted something different for my kids. And one of the biggest things was I didn't want to send them away. I just could not imagine putting my kid on a school bus and saying bye-bye for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. So I happened to read a book called Better Late Than Early, written by Dr. Raymond and Dorothy Moore, who homeschooled in the 70s. So much of it resonated with my own heart towards these kids that I didn't even have yet. So I'd read this book before I had kids. Met my husband. When we decided to get married, he said, I'm fully on board with this. I feel like it was God's providence that his brother happened to have young children and they had decided to homeschool. So it wasn't a foreign idea to him. And when I gave him my reasons, he's like, I'm there with you. So that's what we decided to do. We really wanted to we wanted to spend that time with our kids. We wanted to disciple our kids. We knew that if we sent them away for too much time out of every week, that was not going to happen in a way that we felt was biblical, in terms of being with them kind of day in and day out for the most part and walking alongside of them, like it talks about in Deuteronomy. And so that was really our heart in homeschooling our kids. And I took an approach to it where it was kind of like, it was like a marriage commitment to me. I was going to homeschool no matter what. So whatever happened, we were going to figure it out. You know, like
Sure.
You get married, you enter that covenant and you say, whatever happens, we're going to work hard to solve whatever problems we need to solve so we can keep doing this. And so I think it's important to go into it with that mindset, because it helps you find something that's sustainable sooner than later.
Yeah.
Because, you know, if you're trying to meet all these expectations and you, in your mind, you think you can quit anytime, it's a very different journey than if you're in it for the long haul. And we were in it for the long haul.
I love that. So, and one thing I would add, as someone who was homeschooled myself, I'm 41 and I was homeschooled, and my mom was, you know, on the forefront of fighting for the right to educate your own children.
Wow.
And have the freedom to do that. And we live in Texas, which is one of the freest homeschooling states in America, for which I'm really grateful. But one thing I love, because my mom also was dedicated to it and was dedicated to making it work. We didn't have much money. And so my mom, who had a degree, she had a master's degree actually in teaching, it made way more sense for her to go out and get a master's professor level salary, which still isn't great,
Right.
compared to my dad, who didn't have a degree and was basically a derrick man on an oil field. But she was the teacher and she was the nurturer, and she was the one that my parents decided both together was going to be the best person to teach her children. And they had thought the same things that you did. That was the conviction they had, which is that they wanted to have that time. They wanted to turn the tide of some things that they had seen as far as neglect and abuse in their own backgrounds. And they felt like they would best be able to do that with that time investment, or at least mostly my mom's time investment. My dad was there, but he worked really long hours.
Sure,
His biggest contribution in parenting, honestly, was his willingness to work really hard to just make enough money to put some food on the table and have us, you know, have our one car and beat up old car, you know, but I didn't ever feel deprived. In fact, I had a very happy childhood in many ways, even considering some things that we were up against. I talk in Hard Not Saying Anything Is Bad about the fact that my dad is bipolar. And it was a really hard upbringing in some ways, but his dedication to breaking those generational chains, however imperfectly, was so important. So I think that that same conviction was there in my parents. But one thing that was interesting is, as we grew and as our finances changed even more, my mom did have to pick up some adjunct work. And because she had these skills and this degree, she was able to be a part-time college professor. So I remember that my brother and I would be in the community college library doing our math, trying not to squabble too much, while my mom is teaching her couple of classes that she teaches to get a little bit of grocery money in, you know. And so part of what that dedication to making it work and in for the long haul looks like is being a little flexible with locations. When I was 11, a very small private school started in my little town. It's still going. We actually, our homeschool basketball team just played their basketball team. And I was like, oh my goodness, memories. This is from like 30 years ago.
Wow.
So when I was 11, they started this little bitty school. There were like, 6 students a class, and they wanted my mom to come teach. And so she did. And so I was no longer technically homeschooled during that time, but she taught 5 out of 6 of my classes. And there were like 6 other kids there, maybe, essentially my mom is there teaching my grammar and my English and my science and my history and my math and, all these things. So I did that for 2 years. And then she started her own homeschool co-op, again, with the goal of trying to supplement income just a little bit. And she was teaching probably about 12 to 15 high school students for a couple of years. And that was my high school experience before I started junior college early at age 15 and then went through for a 4-year degree. So it wasn't a conventional even version of homeschooling, but the dedication to kind of being there by my side and being the primary influence and educator was there. So I hear
Right.
you completely and I agree, but I would really also encourage moms who want to homeschool and don't see how they can right now financially to be creative. Like there are
Yes.
ways to make it work. I even hear from full-time working moms who homeschool with the help of online, getting up early, arranging their hours in such a way as to have a day off that they spend with school. I mean, it may not be, it may not look normal to many
Right.
people, but that dedication is still there. And I think that's really cool.
Yeah. And you know what? We have that freedom with homeschooling.
Yeah.
I think more and more parents are starting to understand that there's freedom in homeschooling and it can look so many different ways. And I think the primary and the most important thing is what you just said is that commitment to discipling your kids, being with them and just making it work. And
Yeah.
I think that speaks volumes to our kids too.
It does. It does.
Yeah.
And I know that not all of my listeners homeschool. In fact, there's a really good chunk that doesn't. And I know that Durenda and I are encouraging you in Deuteronomy 6:6-8 as well, that every
Yes.
opportunity you get to invest in your children and to be really mindful of what they're being taught, whatever their education is, and to be aware and to be involved and to be, influencing for good and on your knees. And, it's just such a process regardless of your choice. But yeah, I really resonate with your story. So I wanted to talk to you about this new book that you've written. It's called Raising Boys to Men. I love the tagline, a simple, mercifully short book on raising and homeschooling boys. And one of the reasons, besides just you're being a delightful person, am I enjoying having conversations with you, that I wanted to talk about this book specifically is that every single week when I do What Do You Want to Know Wednesday, I get asked questions that this book addresses very specifically, more so than I do about raising girls. And I think because I'm being asked these questions by women, that does make sense. They might feel a little more equipped to deal with female hormones having gone through them themselves.
Right.
They might feel a little bit more like they can relate to girly things if they themselves are a very feminine woman. We're feminine, but you know what I mean? That their bent is toward femininity or prettier things or more beautiful things, whatever. But then these boy creatures come along and they love them with every fiber of their beings. And they're like, I don't know what to do. They're loud and then energy never stops. And I know that I will have at least one or two people, if not more, who are like, my girl's the wild one. My boy will sit and write for hours. Of course, there are all types. Yes. However, there are characteristics which are consistent. Can you, one, tell us how many boys you have in your group of 8 kids, and then kind of tell me some things that you noticed really early that set them apart from raising girls?
Okay, so we have 5 boys. And so the order was 2 girls and then 4 boys in a row. And when the 4th boy was born, the oldest boy was 5. So there were 4 boys, 5 and under, single births. So bam, 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 bam. And then a girl and then another boy. So those 4 boys were kind of what could easily set the tone in our home. And so there was a lot of balancing that. I really wanted to have a home that wasn't hostile towards masculinity and boyhood and energy and all that. But I also had to keep my senses and my brain and my mental health. So it was a balance of that. But I think early on what I saw was just what you mentioned, the copious amounts of energy. If it's not directed, it can be destructive really quickly. And it's not that they're setting out to be destructive most of the time. I think it's a need for direction. It's a need for us as moms, parents, to direct that energy, because boys need a mission. They need a mission. I heard from Mark Hancock over at Trail Life USA. He said this on an episode that I did with him, podcast episode. He said there are 3 questions going through boys' brains most of the time. And it is, who's in charge? Who's on my team, and what are we doing, or what is our mission? So a lot of times when our boys are going a direction that we're like, what in the world? It's because one or more of those questions aren't being answered for them in that moment. And so we have to answer that question for them. and we have to give them that direction. And so it's just a lot more of kind of staying ahead, especially when they're toddlers and preschoolers and they're still growing in discernment and wisdom, which is what we want to teach them. But it's a process.
Yes.
So they're going to destroy things at times, and maybe not even intentionally. They're going to be wild. They're going to embarrass us sometimes. And I think if we realize that that's just part of being a boy mom, we don't need to get upset about it, and we don't need to react to it. We can respond to it with a better understanding of how our boys are wired. That's what I try to explain in the book. Like, this is how they're wired. They are wired to lead, build, conquer, protect, provide, all of those things. And a lot of times, again, if they're being naughty or doing things that they shouldn't, a lot of times they're trying to do one of those things. They're just doing it poorly. Or in an ill-timed way, or in a way that isn't appropriate for that. And so that's our job to teach them. I see what you're trying to do here. When you smacked your brother because he said something to your sister, you were trying to protect her. And that is a really good thing. But this is not the way we do it.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
Let's talk about other ways we can handle this. And, so it's just a lot of that. And if we can have that understanding and be equipped, and that's what I'm hoping to do through the book, is equip moms to understand their boys better so that they can respond to them in a way that actually encourages their masculinity. We can redirect and correct and discipline, because discipline is part of the picture. I never want people to think, oh, this is just about letting boys run wild. It's not. Although I think there's a time and a place to let them run wild, you know, outside.
Yes.
But because they do need some of that as well. But we don't want to keep a lid on them all the time.
Yep.
You know, but we also want to respond to them in a way that says, hey, I appreciate and respect your masculinity or your tendency to want to do this, that, or the other thing. That's a really good thing. And so you're pointing that out to them, but you're saying this would be a better way to do that.
Yes. So good.
So those are just some of the things that I talk about in the book.
So talk to me about timelines for this level of training.
Okay.
Often when I get questions like this, because I can so resonate with that group of your tiny boy gang that sets the tone for everything. I currently have 5 little boys, boom, 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 but one of them is a set of twins. My youngest right now are 3-year-old twins. And then you've got 5, 7, and 9. And so it's just, they genuinely are the ones that can rule the roost without even trying to, because we're having to step over the sword fights, like jump over the swinging, wooden sword and pick up the mess. And that implies we're just doing stuff for them. We're teaching them and training them. But it can really escalate really quickly. And so people are like, okay, well, we have 7 boys and 3 girls. And our first 2 boys are the oldest. And they're thinking, okay, you must have figured this out, right? You've cracked the code and you've tamed them, and you must have, you don't have any chaos in your home. It's probably fine. It's either people assume there's 0 chaos in my home because I must know what I'm doing, or it's all chaos all the time. And I'm like, somewhere in the middle is really the answer. But what I notice is they want a quick fix, and they want to say, okay, I tried that thing you talked about in your toddler chapter, and I tried to make it geared toward boys, and it's been 2 whole weeks and it's not working. Like, how would you characterize kind of the amount of perseverance and effort that goes into this process of training? Boys and girls, but we're talking about boys.
Yeah. It's definitely a lot longer process than 2 weeks. I will say that for sure. But I think when they're really young, like, when I would say, even 1.5, 2, 3, I find myself, because I have those little guys around me pretty frequently still. And so that it's all still there, which I love. I'll give you an example. I was heading to the freezer the other day, and my 15-month-old grandson was following me. And sometimes they're whining. Sometimes, you don't know. It could be a variety of things, but there's this feeling that he needs something to do. You know, I just would get this gut feeling like, okay, he needs some direction. So I say, hey, come with me. Let's go to the freezer. And he's like, ooh, let's go. So we go, open the freezer. I hand him a pound of hamburger, and I carry a pound, and we carry together, and we go to the kitchen and we put it in the bowl, and I tell him how proud I am of him. So whatever you're doing, be looking around. How can I engage him? How can I include him in what I'm doing? And then, give him these accolades for being such a strong man. Oh, mommy needed your help. Thank you so much. I couldn't have done this without you, you know, kind of thing. And so it's just a lot of that really feeds into their desire to help, their desire to do things in a way, because as we're doing that, we're showing them this is what's actually helpful instead of them just trying to figure it out and then being destructive because they don't really have a clue, you know?
Yes.
But it is, and it's good to have times where they can have the sword fights and the lid is off and we're letting them go. And of course there's a limit, like when they're starting to like knock stuff off the, you know, counters and things like that. Okay. That's where the limit is. So we're going to have to be setting those boundaries and making sure that they're staying within those boundaries. But a lot of times I would give my kids a time limit, you know, the boys, a time limit. Often I just threw them outside. I'm like, that's outside play. I'll do that with my grandkids even, you know, I'm just like, they automatically start wrestling in the middle of our afternoon coffee time that we have every day as a big extended family. And I'll just say, okay, where does that play? Where's that play appropriate? And they'll go outside. Yeah, outside. So I'll throw them outside, or, you know, we lived in a place when the kids were growing up where there was a lot of winter and sometimes you just can't throw them outside or whatever. You don't want to. I just set a timer. You guys got 20 minutes, go for it. You know, and let them do it. Okay, now it's time to pipe down. Now we're teaching them self-regulation.
Yes. Okay,
so when the timer goes off, and that also gives us a neutral party to sort of set the limit instead of us saying, it's time to stop. The timer goes off. The timer's telling them it's time to stop. Yeah. And so just things like that. And again, you know, just engaging that desire of theirs to just always be on a mission and always be doing something. And I love that about boys, quite frankly. I think one of the things that's super fun about boys is that desire to have a mission, that desire to be productive is it makes it easier to teach them to be a producer instead of a consumer, which is something we really tried to teach our kids. Obviously, we're all going to consume at some point, but we encourage them to be producing more than they were consuming. Yeah. So even when they went outside to play, it was about, you know, building, making stuff. And it wasn't necessarily that I told them they had to do that. It's just that was the tone in our home. Ooh, let's try this. Let's try that, you know. And even when they were little, I would hand them hammer, nails, like real stuff instead of, you know, I don't know, an iPad, or we didn't have an iPad when our older kids were younger, but you know what I mean? Just things that just entertained them. It was things they could produce with or model us producing, you know, like you get them the little sink, your little girls, you know, you get them the little sink and the dishes and the food and the little grocery carts and things like that. They love to play that stuff. And then the boys love to do the building and whatever dad's doing, they want to model that usually. And so I think those are just some ways to direct that energy.
Yeah. And what I hear you saying is a willingness to be inconvenienced. Because when you say to that little 18-month-old, thank you so much, I could have done this without you, it's not actually true, but it's the best kind of lie. You know, it's we're almost prophesying over them something that will be true in the future. We're speaking truth and encouragement into the future when they really can lift things that we can't anymore.
Yes, I would say that it is a statement of faith.
Yes,
I believe that at some point I'm going to need them. And I have seen that happen as I've gotten older and the boys have gotten older and they've just stepped in on so many different things that my husband and I have needed or I've needed. And so it really is true.
Yes. And I have seen that already with my teenage boys, that they can do things for me, whether it's lifting or I've got a driver. He's going to drop kids off at piano for me. Right. He's going to stop by the grocery store for me and do it with a happy heart. Like ask me, do you need anything on the way home? Right. And it starts, people go, oh my word, how'd you do that? And I have to think about it. I'm like, there's not any one thing, but it's exactly what you were saying. You start as you mean to go on. So when they're little, you're encouraging them. So my husband talked to me one time about this article that he read that basically if you tell someone you're so smart, you're so talented, you get a very different level of effort the next time they try something than if you tell them you really tried hard and I'm proud of your diligence. Like that there's a difference simply in praising someone for their inherent characteristics that they can't do much about.
Right.
And their ability to, like you say, be a producer, to contribute something to the process. So even if it's not true in that exact moment that you need that 18-month-old's help, the fact of the matter is you are prophesying some good into their future, and you're giving them an opportunity to practice, and you're going to have to be willing to let them help even when you don't need it, in hopes of the day that they will cheerfully do so when you do.
Yeah. And this isn't about raising little servants that are going to serve us. I just feel like there's a mom out there who's probably thinking that. And that's not the purpose.
No.
What we want to do is instill in our kids a sense of value in serving others, which is very biblical. People are the happiest when they are serving others, when they're thinking outside of themselves. And the scripture would agree with that across the board. God knows. He knows what's good for us, what keeps us from depression, what keeps us from turning inward too much is serving. It gives us joy. It does so much for just our spirit and our attitudes and our health even.
Amen.
And so when we're teaching our boys to do these things, the other thing I want to point out is you're instilling confidence in that kid. So that child looks at the situation as though he brings something of value to it.
Right.
We want our kids and our sons to grow up knowing and confident that they have value to bring to the table.
Amen.
Because they do, and so, but when they know that and they can communicate that and they can bring that to the table, that is a huge part of their success as adults, in terms of even going out to get a job, have a career, all of that. So these are tiny little things, little seeds that we sow during this time that eventually make all the difference in the world. And it's easy to underestimate the value of that.
Yeah.
There's so much out on the internet about, being this kind of parent and that kind of parent. You should respond this way and that way. And really it comes back down to the simple things, the very basic things that we're doing as part of our rhythms day in and day out. That is what impacts our children the most.
I 100% agree. So I've heard you talk about fostering masculinity. And I think that that's something that it might not give our audiences too much pause, but it is certainly something that would rile up a pretty big mob in the secular world. And there's this talk about toxic masculinity, and I've had some conversations with people by what they mean by that, because, it's important to define our terms. What do you mean by toxic? What do you mean by masculinity? What do you mean by combining those words? And sometimes they're describing what is truly overbearing, kind of authoritarian behavior that nobody wants to be treated that way by any gender, but that might be more likely to happen from a male. And sometimes they're describing things that are related to that characteristic of building and conquering and leading, and they object to it, but it's actually how God has wired men. So can you give us a biblical definition of masculinity that you're working with when you're seeking to instill that in your boys?
Well, if you take your boys back to the scriptures and to all these different stories, especially in the Old Testament, stories of war, stories of conquering, stories of leading. You've got, King David, you have Gideon, you have all these different examples, none of them being perfect. No. But many of them being committed to going back to the Lord even when they made mistakes. Okay. Yeah. So that right there is that's a huge part of masculinity, is just a yielding to God and being willing to do what he calls them to do, whatever that is. But what we see there, overall, we see warriors. We see dragon slayers. And one of the reasons that our culture is so, just doesn't understand or appreciate the aggression that is part of how our boys are wired is because we're not running for our lives anymore. We live in the super comfy, cushy, women and children. We've got all these protections set in place that don't necessarily require men to be part of the picture. And we have a very feminized society where even the church has, the culture and the church, everything is feminized. And so anything that's not that is icky. It's to be hated. It's to be, looked down upon, frowned upon, punished even, there's a hostility towards it. There's like this hatred towards men, masculinity, and really it's a hatred towards God in his ways. We know that at the end of the day, that's really what that's about.
Yeah, it is.
But I think that it's so important that our boys understand that it's appropriate for them to help the helpless, to be there for people who are weak, to know how to help them, but then also to know how to wage war when necessary, that they're not afraid to do that. And so that's something we want to instill in them all along the way. And so if we can keep that balance in our approach towards their, just the different things that they do, the ways that the way they respond to certain things, certain situations. I'll give you an example. We have one son who just ran hot. It was just in his nature to run just a little on the angry side. And his little vein would pop out in his neck and his whole face would turn beet red when any injustice had happened, whether it was between siblings and he had nothing to do with it. He felt the need to jump in and protect whoever he thought was weaker. Yeah. And so it caused a lot of riffraff along the way, but understanding that what he was trying to do was good, and that defending justice and defending the weak is a good thing, but that's not the way to do it. Like, let's get some understanding of what just happened here before we go in and slug our brother over this thing. So it's just all those little situations along the way, going into them with a mindset of understanding where they're coming from and what they're trying to do. We're not excusing sin. We do need to address sin. That's really important. And anger and that venting of it is something that has to be dealt with, But now fast forward, this son is 24, has a wife, 2 kids. And I just asked him the other day, hey, can we talk about like how you handled your anger, like what it felt like as a kid, what made you angry, when did you realize it was important to deal with your anger? Like, when did you realize it was a problem and it needed to be dealt with? So I love being able to talk to him about this now because he has overcome so much of that. It's still sometimes a struggle for him, but overall, he's a very, very patient person, which if you looked at the little impulsive 4-year-old, you would have said, I don't know how this is going to turn out.
Well, and that's what I really want to encourage moms to consider is the long road.
Yes.
The end, maybe not result, but the progress that you're going to see, and you might not see it for 20 years. And I know that feels very frustrating that's like, man, is it even worth it? Yes, absolutely. It is. I've got probably 2 that fit that description. One particularly that we would call our little rage monster, not to his face, but like when we talked about him, he was just like, man, he just, and in the most endearing way for those that are going to get offended by that. And by the way, that's a Dude Perfect reference. There's a guy on there that loses his temper and beats up cars and stuff that they call the rage monster.
So there's a lightheartedness to that.
Yes, exactly.
That name.
Exactly. It wasn't like he's a monster, because we try to use words of life about our children. And so even when we're talking about them, and especially when we're talking to them, but he was our little rage monster. Like, he just really struggled to control those emotions. But you're right. He is all about justice. Now, sometimes it's justice for himself.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
He is all about justice. He is all about, kind of defending those who have been wronged. And so harnessing that and teaching them. So I get asked all the time, that's another really big FAQ is, okay, I have a really angry kid, whether boy or girl, kind of how do I interact with them? And I think it's just that patience of teaching them some practical self-control measures, whether it's using timers, whether it's teaching them to box breathe. If you don't know what that is, you can look it up. Not you specifically, you can too, but I'm not going to describe box breathing right this second, but you can look that up. That's an actual technique that helps you to calm your regulatory system. Like just get everything back in order physically so that your brain can calm down and your emotions can cool down. Teaching him what we call bullet prayers. Jesus, help me to be calm. Even just Jesus, help. Lord,
Right.
I need to not be angry. If you do anything complicated, you're going to lose the thread, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I wanted to talk to you about that because something I've seen you post about on social media several times, and there's a chapter on it in your book, and it talks about using few words when it comes to boys. And
Yes.
I think this might be a soapbox of yours. Can you talk about this a little bit?
Yes, absolutely. Now, do you want me to preface this with the story from the book?
Yes, go for it.
Okay. So for the 4 boys that I mentioned before, they were all teenagers at the same time. And I would give them directives or be talking to them. And I just felt like they were not hearing me. Like 90% of the time, I wasn't getting a response. They weren't doing what I told them to do. And I talked to him about it more, and I was getting nowhere. So my husband and I went out on a date, and I unloaded on him. I told him everything that was going on. He just listened. He was so patient and didn't say anything. And then we got in the car and we were pulling out of the parking lot, and he said to me, I need to tell you something, but I don't want to hurt your feelings. And I said, just tell me. I need to hear it, kind of like that hard isn't the same thing as bad, right?
Yep. Yep.
And he said, you use too many words. The boys don't respect you when you talk so much. Ooh. And I just was like, oh, bang, I knew this. How did I forget it? I knew this about guys. When did I forget this? Okay, so I went back home and I called all the boys in, and they all thought they were in trouble. And
what ages are they at this point?
At this point, they're probably 12, 14, 15, 17 maybe.
Yeah.
All pretty much in the teen zone. And I said, this is what's been going on. This is what your dad said. He said that I used too many words. Is that true? And they said, oh, yes, absolutely. They said, we would rather feel physical pain than listen to you talk. And they weren't being disrespectful. They were being honest. And I was so glad that they felt like they could do that with me. And so I had to retrain myself. I'm a writer, communicator. I love words. I love describing things perfectly and all of that. And I had to just change all of that. And I had to change it in a way that was just so that they could hear what I was saying. So I would tell myself, I would stop and I would say, okay, give me a second, guys. Okay. And I would think about what were the most important things that I needed, like what were the 3 most important things they needed to know. I'd shoot them off in bullet points, as few words as possible, and 15 seconds or less. And that worked like a charm. Now, I told that story on social media, and I had this mom say to me, that's a horrible idea. They're going to grow up thinking everybody has to talk to them like that, and they're never going to know how to listen to their wives and blah, blah, blah. And I just was like, okay, hold on. Here's the deal. Look at the context of the story. These are teen boys who are in the middle of massive hormone changes. And this is something every mom needs to know. As that boy is getting into the teen years, 12, 13 in there, those hormones are going berserk. Now, we all know what it feels like to be bad PMS or perimenopause or whatever. Okay, they have the same thing. They get the brain fog and all of that. And so we need to be ready to be gracious. We still hold their feet to the fire in terms of their responsibilities, but there's more grace for them. And so at this point in the game, they cannot handle too many words. They really will not hear me. And so we did that for a while. And of course, they grow, they develop, they become men. And 3 of those guys are married to women who love to talk. And they are totally fine with it. Yeah. So that's not you're taking a situation and a season really and saying, I understand what's happening in this season for you. And I want to work with you. Like I'm on your team. And so we're going to get through this together. You can even, I would suggest talking about it. Like you have a lot of hormones raging through your body right now. And there's going to be some things that go on that you're not going to understand. Foggy brain, forget things, and especially oldest children, really responsible children, can get, boys specifically, can get real hard on themselves because they're like, I could do this last year. Why can't I remember to do this now? What's wrong with me? There's nothing wrong with you. So that's our part. Let them go through that with their dignity intact. So the using few words really helped a lot. And it is appropriate at other ages as well. But I found especially in the teen years, it was really, really important. And it can be super helpful with our husbands as well. Can I just say that?
100%, because we cannot simply say in any scenario, in any gender consideration, women or men, boys or girls, that we have to require other people to communicate only a certain way or communicate only like there's got to be give and take constantly. Absolutely. I love that you said we need to help them get through this with their dignity intact. We are their moms. We are for them. We are advocating for their good. Yes. And so to insist on doing it, quote, our way, when, as you say, we want to be treated with grace and dignity and respect when we're struggling, and to ignore kind of the broader picture that's going on is kind of tone deaf. But then, of course, we have been instilling in them servant-heartedness so that hopefully the goal would be once they exit that brain fog, that frustrating hormonal situation, we are also saying you need to have grace for someone else's personality and the way they express themselves. It can't all be tailored to you. Yes. I heard you loud and clear. I did what you asked me to do so that we could get through that season. But now you're going to have to mature some more and do the same for others as you wanted done for you. You know, it's the golden rule.
Exactly. I love what you said about the way we're treating our sons, because this is so important to understand. We are teaching our boys how to allow women to treat them. So if we are disrespectful towards them and snarky, they will think that it's okay to marry a woman like that, who would do that to them, even though they didn't like it growing up. They could end up being attracted to it because it's familiar to them. So we need to be super careful. We talk a lot about girls learning how to be treated by men, right?
Yes, we do.
You know, but do we ever talk about it the other way around? I don't want my sons marrying a woman who disrespects them, who's snarky to them, who mocks them and makes fun of them. So I better treat them the way I would want, you know, to a certain degree, their wife to treat them in terms of respect and honoring their masculinity, their desire to lead. And again, within reason, because we're not in the scenario that I'm their wife, obviously, but I think you kind of get the idea. We want to respond to those situations with respect and honor so that that becomes the standard for them.
I love that that's your heart for your boys. I'm sure it is your heart for all of your children to meet them where they are, while still, as you say, holding their feet to the fire of scriptural truth and modeling and holding your own feet to the fire. We are adhering to these standards by God's grace as unto the Lord, so that we don't end up being hypocrites to our children and they see us having a double standard for letting ourselves have all this grace when we're struggling, but not giving it to them.
Exactly. We're modeling for them.
Yes. Which is the best and most effective way to lead. If you are looking for a way to forge a path forward in raising boys that will be confident in their identity that God gave them from birth, that will, Lord willing, desire to follow his ways, I think this is going to be such an incredible resource for you. Raising Boys to Men by Durenda Wilson. Durenda, thank you so much for being here. If you had one more piece of advice for moms, boys, girls, whatever gender they have, could you just leave that with us today?
Well, I think what we said, we've kind of said throughout the whole episode is the work is worth it. It's hard. It's hard, but it is so good. So your kids are going to spend most of their lives as adults. Yep. So what you're instilling, the seeds you're sowing and watering and fertilizing and trying to nurture are going to affect their adulthood and in so many different ways. But it's really comes back to the simplicity of God's word. It comes back to the simplicity of walking in obedience to the Lord as you're raising your kids, no matter what anybody else is saying, and knowing that you're going to have to persevere in order to really do this well. We have to have a resilience, and we have to be willing to just keep doing the hard thing. And I think that would be my encouragement to you. It is worth it. It is so worth it. So I just want to encourage you in that.
And it's so wonderful to see someone who has gone before us, who's seeing the fruit, who can speak with such confidence to that. as she is taking care of her 11 grandchildren given to her by her wonderful kids, and not perfect, but worth it. I love that encouragement. Durenda, where do we find you? Where are you offering your encouragement elsewhere? How can we buy your books? Tell us all about it.
Okay, well, you can find my 3 books and the new one, Raising Boys to Men, at Amazon. You can also find them at my website, durendawilson.com. I'm not sure when this is airing, but we have some incentives along the way for ordering. The first day that the book is actually available is March 5th. So that's Tuesday, March 5th. And I would love for you to be encouraged by that. I also have a podcast, the Durenda Wilson podcast. We just hit 500 episodes and 3 million downloads. So there's a lot of really good encouragement there. Encourage you to go and check that out. There's actually a little search bar at the top of the list of episodes on my podcast page of my website where you can put in keywords and it'll bring up the episodes that you need to hear now that would be the most encouraging to you.
I love that. Well, this is going to air, I think, the day after your book first comes out.
All right. So then I can tell you about the incentive. So
yeah, go for it.
March 5th and March 6th, I'll send Abbie the link so she can put it in the show notes. But basically, if you purchase the book, you can go to this link, enter the order number or receipt number, and you'll receive free access to the Unhurried Homeschooler audiobook. So the Unhurried Homeschooler is a simple, mercifully short book on homeschooling. So be sure to take advantage of that if you can.
I love that so much. Durenda, thank you so much for being here today. Thank you for sharing your wisdom with all moms, young or older or in between. And I really appreciate your time.
Thank you. It was a delight to be here.
If you enjoy the MS for Mama podcast, I would be so honored if you would subscribe and follow along, maybe share with friends or even leave a review. And if you want more content on motherhood and biblical responses to cultural issues, be sure to follow along on Instagram at m.is.for.mama.